Hi, it's me, and welcome back to another Limbus Company new ID and ego review. Walpurgisnacht 5, full stop by a bullet, began this week, and it brought with it 3 pieces of new equipment, with 2 being triple-aught IDs in full stop office fixer Heathcliff and full stop office rep Hong Lu, and a new He ego for Outis in Magic Bullet. Both of the IDs are crazy strong, just like most other Walpurgisnacht IDs are, so I definitely recommend pulling for those if you have the chance. Magic Bullet is perhaps a bit situational. The only ID who gains any major benefit from using it is, well, Magic Bullet, but if you don't have that ID, you probably have no reason to pull for the ego specifically. Before we get into the new stuff, however, this is your first opportunity to shard Solemn Lament Yi Sang, Red Eyes and Penitence Ryoshu, and Gregor's Solemn Lament Ego, so if you missed those, I would strongly recommend sharding them during this 2-week period. Wait until after you do your pulls for the new IDs, though, if you intend to do any pulls, because that way you have a chance of getting those during your pulls. Now, without further ado, let's get into these new kits. We're going to be talking about full stop office fixer Heathcliff first, but there are a bunch of new status effects to take note of before we begin anything else. The thing is, none of these new status effects really provide much to talk about. Ammo Atelier Logic is a unique ammo type with no additional effects on the status itself. Concentration Sniper is just a counter that increases by 1 every turn with a maximum of 4, that you start with 0. Overwatch Assignment is just another way to retreat, though not having Courier Trunk means that he loses nothing from retreating. And Reload is just the same type of reload as Solemn Lament Yi Sang, except it lacks the downside of losing your SP as a result. Alright, so to explain this, I spent an entire segment talking about Pierce Resist Down and how its math compares to and alters the status of Pierce Fragility, but then Project Moon decided last night to change that to make it so that it actually inflicts Pierce Fragility instead of Pierce Resist Down on Heathcliff's skill 2. So in an effort to not re-record my entire script, I'm just going to overlay myself saying Fragility over every spot that I said Resist Down in the original recording, so if you're wondering why it sounds weird whenever I say Fragility from this point onwards, that would be why. Before we talk about Heathcliff's skills, however, we need to talk about his passives. Specifically, Snipe is a passive that does not require any resources to activate. It gives Heathcliff 3 Pierce power up on the first turn of any fight, which would be crazy just by itself even if this ID didn't already have the best skill 1 in the entire game. Now, Heathcliff's total ammo is at a rather low amount of 10, and only gaining 1 special ammo per encounter. So as part of Snipe, Heathcliff will automatically activate Overwatch Assignment and retreat at turn end if he has no available ammunition, and this does include his unique ammo. Since this triggers passively, unlike the Deviat, it's a lot more practical to actually do in battle. When he returns from retreating, or on the first turn he enters battle as a backup unit, he will reload, once again gain 3 Pierce power up, have the maximum of 4 Concentration Sniper, and will gain the 1 unique ammo if he was a backup unit at first specifically. Heathcliff's non-optional retreat also gives a good segue into talking about his support passive, since it will work while he's on the backline. Giving an extra 2 poise count to the ID with the least ammo is actually pretty solid, since most ammo IDs also happen to be poise IDs. That said, the lack of skills that spend ammo on LCCB Ryoshu and Pirate Gregor make them both very poor targets for this effect. Plus, unlike those two, full stop Hong Lu will always gain double the poise count from this effect, and while any ID can gain 4 when on low enough poise count, Hong Lu is going to be the one who benefits from it the most. We might as well talk about his passive here as well. Gaining 2 haste with enough poise is actually really good for this ID, as it is a good inflictor of same turn fragility, so going first is a really nice bonus to have. Being able to give 3 poise to an ally if he's not going to attack this turn is also really nice, and after having not performed any attacks or ego, with the exception of through target spotted, which we will get into later, he will gain 10 poise and 1 pierce power up next turn for free. All of this activates from just 2 Pride Resonance, which is insanely easy to reach in most teams and practically guaranteed in a dedicated poise setup. Heathcliff's defense skill, Combat Poise, is a 4-14 rolling Pride Evade. It can gain 3 poise up to 3 times per turn when evading an attack, and increases Concentration Sniper by an additional 1 at turn end if it has been used. However, if he has no ammo left, he will instead use Taking Cover, a 2-10 rolling clashable guard with 1 unbreakable coin. Alright, remember what I said like a minute ago? Turns out the defense skill can still inflict Pierce Resist Down using the guard. All you really need to know about Pierce Resist Down is it compounds with Pierce Fragility, and by itself is technically slightly better, but as only inflicted by the guard, it's not nearly as good as if it were inflicted by his skill 2. Instead of giving Poise, it will instead inflict 1 Pierce Resist Down once per turn on Clash Win, which is arguably more useful depending on the circumstance. Both of these skills gain an additional on-use effect if Full Stop Hong Lu is in the active party at the same time. After the defense skill has fully played out, Hong Lu will then use melee support, a 5-13 rolling / pride skill with 2 coins, against the attacker as an assist attack. While the skill itself is not anything impressive, it does allow you to generate an additional pride resource, deals pretty good damage with critical hits, and never consumes any poise count in the practical sense since it always gives 2 poise count to Hong Lu on use. Plus, it allows Heathcliff to be able to deal damage should he be out of ammo. That said, you can still take advantage of this while he does have ammo, so use it when you need to since his evade is still a pretty strong skill overall. Return Fire is a 5-14 rolling Pierce Gloom skill with 3 coins, but keep in mind that on turn 1 you always have 3 Pierce power up, which makes this an 8-17 rolling skill. While the skill itself is unimpressive, and by unimpressive I mean the single strongest skill 1 in the entire game, it's mostly used to set up Heath for later turns by giving him haste and poise count. The damage is also pretty high, with the biggest downside being that it uses 3 ammo. While you usually aren't looking to use this skill because of its high ammo cost, it can be very useful for getting Heath to be the fastest unit for the next turn in order to inflict more Pierce Fragility at the start of the turn. Headshot is a 10-22 rolling Pierce Envy skill with a single coin that deals up to 50% more damage depending on how much faster Heathcliff is than his target. Single coin skills aren't usually that impressive, but the fact that this one inflicts Pierce Fragility, while also clashing incredibly high, means that it is his most useful skill in terms of effects. The extra critical hit damage of this skill also means that it hits really hard despite having only a single coin. While he can only inflict 2 Pierce Fragility per turn, and only 1 for next turn with a crit, this is insanely potent for increasing the amount of Pierce damage you deal, especially when combined with the 3 Pierce Fragility inflicted by Faust's Hexnail or any other skill that inflicts Fragility. There's another factor of this skill, but we can't really talk about it until we get to Hong Lu's kit, so we'll leave it at that for now. Just know that this skill is insanely potent for dealing more damage and more Pierce damage per turn. ALHV Pulverization Round is a 15-33 rolling Pierce Pride skill with a single coin, and those eagle-eyed viewers will notice that I am talking about the alternative skill 3 first. This is because no matter what, the first skill 3 you use will be this one, since you start with one of the unique ammo. This is actually the first skill in the entire game to have more than a +5 offense level, though the additional +1 isn't likely to make too big of a difference in most cases. The skill itself generates a lot of poise and poise count, plus it can give up to 8 more poise if you have maximum concentration sniper. That said, the primary function of this skill is to deal massive damage, and it's pretty likely to land a critical hit due to how much poise it gives Heathcliff before its use. In fact, combining all conditionals means that at maximum, this skill can gain an additional 525% more damage with a critical hit, which is insanely high. Realistically, you won't get that full damage bonus, but this skill can hit as hard as Blazing Strike under its average use case as long as it crits. On every subsequent use, you instead use Going for the Bullseye, a 12-26 rolling Pierce Pride skill with a single coin. The skill itself is almost identical, with the only actual differences being the roll, it gaining 3 less poise count, and dealing 50% less damage with a crit when compared to its alternative. It also cuts the bonus damage from concentration in half, though that is a lot less significant than the rest of the damage conditionals. While this ID does perfectly fuel Heathcliff's AEDD, he doesn't really make very good use of it. Instead, his ego that supports him the best is actually Fell Bullet, which, in combination with Poise teams having really good capacity for Pride Resonance, allows Heathcliff to generate Poise potency incredibly quickly. The 1 ammo gained on crit kill still doesn't matter too much, but its passive also allows Heathcliff to gain Poise very quickly on top of it. And on top of that, he also fuels it rather well. While not quite as synergistic, this ID also fuels 3 of the 4 Sin Affinities needed for asymmetrical inertia. Tremor Clockwinding, being able to increase his max speed, is useful, though pretty difficult to trigger in a Poise team, but having the option to perform a very strong attack without consuming ammo is usually pretty solid for what this ID wants to do. And while he doesn't fuel it perfectly, Body Sack's 3 haste will help to make this Heathcliff inflict his fragility before the rest of your team acts for the next turn. Moving on to full stop office rep Hong Lu, we have more passive effects, but they aren't nearly as complex as Heathcliff's. The most interesting part, and the only part that's always active, is that Hong Lu can still use his coins that spend ammo when attacking, even if he doesn't have any ammo. The difference is that they lose any effects tied to the use of ammo, as well as any on-hit effects only on that coin. It's important to remember that any coin that didn't use ammo will still activate its effect, and that includes all of the most important effects of each skill. That said, seeing as Hong Lu starts with 18 ammo and has the capacity to reload, running out isn't going to happen very quickly in most fights. Once you have 5 pride resources, he also is able to gain 1 poise count at combat start if he has 20 or more poise potency, basically making it so that he can sustain his poise better once he has a guaranteed chance to crit. More importantly, however, it will also empower his skills 2 and 3 if Heathcliff is currently in a backup slot. Whether he be there from the start or from retreating earlier in the battle, it doesn't matter. We'll get into what that entails once we go over those skills. Unlike Heathcliff, his support passive is not that interesting, only making skills that spend ammo by 10% deal more damage. While it can be helpful, you'll probably rather have some of his other support passives like that of Ting Tang Hong Lu, which is less specialized and has a bigger damage increase. Hong Lu's defense skill, which is also called Combat Poise, is a 4 to 14 rolling Pride Evade that can give 1 poise up to 5 times per turn on evading an attack. It really isn't anything special when compared to most evade skills. However, if Hong Lu is out of ammo, it becomes Beyond the Shadow instead, a 5 to 13 rolling / Pride clashable counter with 2 coins. It generates a decent amount of poise count from using it, but more importantly, it allows Hong Lu to reload once per encounter. He doesn't even really need this effect to remain useful, but getting your bullets back will help your damage quite a bit. And since you can only reload once, the first clashable counter that isn't Lust is actually a pretty solid skill overall, though it does less damage than the rest of his skills overall thanks to not being a Pierce skill. Take the Shot is a 3 to 12 rolling Sloth Pierce skill with 3 coins. All of Hong Lu's skills consume a decent amount of ammo, and since this one is one of his best ways to gain poise potency, being out of ammo actually does hurt his poise generation quite a bit. That said, his poise count generation is one of the best out of all the poise IDs we currently have, being able to generate 2 to 3 just by using any skill. Target Marked is a 4 to 16 rolling Pierce Gloom skill with 3 coins, but can become a 7 to 19 rolling skill if Hong Lu uses it with at least 3 ammo, making it far more consistent than most skill 2s. The second coin of this skill deals a very high amount of damage when it spends ammo, increasing even more with a critical hit, but the main draw of this skill comes from 2 things. Firstly, inflicting attack power down is still incredibly valuable in any amount, so that by itself makes the skill worth using, plus you don't lose that from being out of ammo. But the actual draw of this skill is triggering Target Spotted while full stop Heathcliff is in the party. It's guaranteed with a resonance of at least 4, and this is basically just assist attack for skill 2, but it can only activate for full stop Heathcliff. Needless to say, allowing Heath to use Headshot for free, both generating 1 envy as well as dealing high damage and inflicting an extra Pierce fragility, is insanely strong in most situations. It needn't be said that any skill which allows you an extra action per turn is incredibly valuable, and theoretically, you can activate this effect more than once per turn. When Heathcliff is in a backup slot, this skill instead becomes empowered into Combo Target Marked. This is a 4 to 20 rolling Pierce Gloom skill with 4 coins, the fourth of which being Unbreakable, that can become a 7 to 23 rolling skill with 3 or more ammo. The 3 coins that were present are unchanged from before, and the empowerment only actually adds 2 things. Firstly, losing the Clash increases the power of the Unbreakable coin by 5, though Hong Lu is a bit too frail to consistently make use of this. That Unbreakable coin can hit very hard even without a crit, and as a result, this skill is ridiculously strong, especially when used with 3 ammo. It's here as a benefit for when Heathcliff is retreated, and it performs that job incredibly well. Full Stop to Life is a 7 to 19 rolling Pierce Pride skill with 3 coins that can become a 10 to 22 rolling skill when used with 3 ammo. This skill is always activating Target Spotted while Heathcliff is in the party, regardless of your residence, which effectively adds a 22 rolling coin to the end of the skill. Plus, the skill itself will always inflict 2 Pierce Fragility, which combos incredibly well with Heathcliff since his Headshot happens to be a Pierce skill. The additional stagger threshold being raised by spending ammo is the least impressive effect that his ammo can get him through all of his skills, so using this skill without ammo is just using it with a bit less damage overall. When empowered, this skill becomes combo full stop to life. It's a 7 to 23 rolling Pierce Pride skill with 4 coins, the fourth of which being Unbreakable, that can become a 10 to 26 rolling skill with 3 or more ammo. It gains the exact same benefits as the previous skill, however, the Unbreakable coin now deals bonus damage the weaker that the target is to pierce damage, resulting in a coin that can hit for damage matching Heathcliff's skill 3 after boosts. There isn't much to say about it other than it deals an insane amount of damage. This ID doesn't really synergize with a lot of Honglu's ego, but there's two that are worth mentioning. Firstly, while it doesn't synergize with his kit, he perfectly fuels Cavernous Wailing, meaning that building a hybrid Poise Tremor team designed to take advantage of that may be worth doing for those who don't have every Tremor ID necessary for a pure Tremor team. The other ego worth mentioning is Soda, as this is Honglu's first ID who can naturally gain the ability to crit without help from an outside source. It's a decent option for healing SP over time, so if your team can generate Gluttony, it is worth considering bringing it. Both full stop IDs are designed to function with each other, whether that be with both in the active party or with Heathcliff sitting in the backup. Depending on which of these permutations you use, you're going to want to build your team a little bit differently. If you'd rather have both in your party, you'll want to use a lot of Pierce-heavy IDs. The first of which to note is Kaskozhuk, who can not only give poise to allies by herself, but also does so through Blind Obsession. Being able to use 8 skills with only 6 skill slots is also especially worth considering, since it technically allows you to build up your Sin faster than any other team in the game right now. Any of the Sync Association IDs also pair very well due to their Sin affinities. 3 of them also happen to be Poise, which is rather important, and all of them deal fairly high damage on their own. Combining Sinclair's ability to inflict fragility alongside Merceau's insane consistency and ability to generate gluttony means you have a very solid Pierce and Poise setup. Twin Hook Pirate Gregor is also a very solid damage dealer who reliably maintains his own poise. He brings along with him Solemn Lament, which will deal very heavy damage thanks to Pierce Resist down, and it isn't too hard to feel either. That said, he is going to take from Heathcliff's support passive once he retreats, and is probably the least useful supportive ID for full stop as a result. You don't need to restrict yourself to just other Poise IDs either. Princess Rodion and Manager Don Quixote are both incredibly valuable Pierce units when added to the team together, with Rodion being an incredibly good support for Dawn specifically, while also having Pride and being a solid ID on her own. Solemn Lament Yi Sang also deals incredibly heavy Pierce damage. While Poise doesn't have a great deal of synergy with sinking, access to strong Pierce ego like Sun Shower means he's still a very reliable damage dealer for the team. The Ring IDs both function really well for the same reason, being entirely Pierce units who both have very consistent high damage, and Faust, being able to inflict Gaze, also helps to further amplify Pierce fragility, which is always going to be something that's valuable. Plus, with enough of these IDs, you can get enough Lust Resonance in order to be able to activate her passive for faster SP gain. Now, if you're the type of person who would rather have Heathcliff as a backup from the start, I'd say that it's better to focus on maintaining your poise instead. As a result, Kaskozhuk is still a fantastic ally to keep in mind, but for the same reasons, so I won't go over her again. The Blade Lineage group of IDs pair very well in this type of team setup. Specifically Don Quixote, who is able to give poise to her allies using her skills. While you're at it, you can also throw in Blade Lineage's Yi Sang, Faust, and Merceau in order to have more synergy between them while they are in the team. Edgar Family Butler Ryoshu, while a selfish ID, pairs really well in most Poise team setups thanks to her high speed and AoE damage, so she'll also always be a strong recommendation for them. And lastly, either team has a pretty strong budget option in Pequod First Mate Yi Sang, who has very high damage on his skill 2 once his poise gets going, and has really good sin affinities for a team, including the rare Gluttony generation, which poise tends to lack. We also have a new He ego for Outis in Magic Bullet, and to start off, let me just say that the fact that this is the first burn support we've received since Walpurgisnacht 3, 8 months ago by the way, is a little absurd. Especially considering that this ego by itself is pretty underwhelming. 8 resources and 25 SP for an attack that is effectively single target on most IDs is not something worth considering, that is, unless you have the ID of the same name. The Awakening is a 22 to 36 rolling Pierce Pride skill with 1 coin and 1 attack weight. The incredibly consistent roll does make it valuable for winning clashes, but that's about all it has going for it. The burn and dark flame infliction isn't likely to matter outside of a burn team, in which case it's actually really strong. Gaining Magic Bullet after use based on your resonance can help the Magic Bullet ID reach high amounts of Magic Bullet faster as well. Note that you only gain Magic Bullet before use if you're currently at 0. The passive also helps Magic Bullet Outis to inflict burn potency, something she really struggles with, allowing her to inflict a maximum of 7 burn per hit up to 3 times per turn, and twice per turn, allowing her to inflict 1 dark flame instead if the target has 30 or more burn potency. This is undeniably incredibly good, but on IDs other than Magic Bullet, you can only inflict a third of the burn, and your Magic Bullet generation relies entirely on the ego, making it so much slower. While unimpressive on the face, the skill gains additional effects based on how much Magic Bullet you have when it is used. So let's go over those individually, and I'll point out which one is the most useful. At 1 Magic Bullet, the skill deals 20% more damage and increases the enemy's stagger threshold by the damage dealt up to 30. This is the version of the skill that will always be used on the first use if you aren't using Magic Bullet Outis, the ID, and for its cost, it is definitely too weak to be worth using in that case. At 2 Magic Bullet, the skill deals 10% more damage, and instead of dealing damage to the main target, the attack's damage is instead dealt to up to 4 other viable targets. It also inflicts 3 paralyze on hit, but since it only actually hits the main target, it only inflicts to the enemy that can't take the damage. At 3 Magic Bullet, the skill has an attack weight of 3, deals 20% more damage, and inflicts both 2 attack power down and 10 burn on hit. This is the first version that is really strong, though it is better if Outis can attack first when she's using it. At 4 Magic Bullet, the skill has an attack weight of 4, deals 30% more damage, and raises stagger threshold equal to damage dealt up to 20. It also inflicts 3 fragile next turn to every damaged target. This is almost certainly the most powerful version of the skill. Being able to mass inflict fragile for the next turn is a crazy effect, and getting to 4 Magic Bullet on Magic Bullet Outis is not difficult, since that's when her skill 2 stops increasing her Magic Bullet. At 5 Magic Bullet, the skill has an attack weight of 5, deals 30% more damage, inflicts 10 burn on hit, and inflicts 4 offense level down and defense level down next turn. This one is a bit underwhelming when compared to the last one, but it's saved by having high crowd damage and is still worth using as a result. At 6 Magic Bullet, we get a variant that actually works differently. The skill loses a bunch of base power and coin power, raises stagger threshold by up to 30 on hit, and has 7 attack weight. However, this makes it so that the coin can re-roll up to twice if the target has enough burn, making it the highest damaging version of the skill once you factor in that every hit inflicts burn, though the Dark Flame infliction from the skill is only once per target per turn. That said, there's a good chance you'll inflict more Dark Flame from the passive of this skill, since this is pretty unlikely to be the first version of the skill that you end up using. And at 7 Magic Bullet, the skill deals 200% more damage, an additional 2.5% more damage for every percentage of the enemy HP that is missing, up to 200%, and forces the target's pierce resistance to register as fatal for the attack, essentially meaning you can deal roughly 12 times the damage against the target, provided that the target is resistant to pierce. That said, it doesn't have any additional attack weight unlike the previous variants, though it hits that one target insanely hard. The big downside of this version of the skill is that using it kills Outis after use. I would recommend using Magic Bullet Fire instead as a result, or just not using it at all if you're not using Magic Bullet Outis the ID. The most powerful variants of the skill are definitely with 4 or 6 Magic Bullet, since those are the ones that contribute to the most of the potential damage on your team. The corroded version of the skill is a 40 to 20 rolling Pierce Pride Ego with 1 coin and 1 attack weight. It's almost identical to the Awakening in terms of effects, though it inflicts burn count where the Awakening does not, and inflicts 3 more Dark Flame when it kills its target. Just generally, it will never be worth using the Corrosion since it's too expensive when compared to the Awakening, which has all of the same bonuses. Magic Bullet is pretty obviously designed to be used by Lobotomy Ego Magic Bullet Outis, who feels 2 out of the 3 affinities needed for it. is a burn ID, and is the only ID who actually benefits from having Magic Bullet. They have very strong synergy with each other because they were designed to, and thus are pretty good when paired up. That said, there is an Outis ID who perfectly fuels this ego in Blade Lineage Outis. So the point is, use the Magic Bullets together. Magic Bullet is designed to be used in a burn team. As a result, you'll want to primarily focus on bringing burn units in a team that intends to use it. Dawn Office Sinclair is the first one to mention, and is yet another Walpurgisnacht ID that the team really wants to have, though N-Corp Sinclair works too if you don't have as much luck or resources. Pretty much all the Liu IDs that are worth bringing also work incredibly well with a team that uses this ego because they are the burn team after all. Specifically, Liu Rodian and Liu Ishmael, and to a lesser extent Liu Ryoshu, work quite well in maintaining enemy burn so that Dark Flame can deal the most possible damage. And lastly, while I don't recommend it, this is a Pride ego, so bringing a team strongly focused on Pride resonance will help to make your Magic Bullet build up much more quickly if you'd rather run a non-burn team but still use this ego. IDs like those of the Blade Lineage and N-Corp factions do pretty good to support this, though it will never make the ego as useful as that of being used in a burn team. And that's about all I have to say about the new things added to Walpurgisnacht 5. While I don't think creating an ego specifically designed for a specific ID, especially since the availability of that ID is really limited, I actually really do like both IDs introduced this time around. If you want a chance to test any of the new stuff out, you can always add me as I have them at maximum level Uptie and Threadspin in my company. I'd love to hear your opinions of them in the comments, and if you like the video, you should like and subscribe. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon.